Hi guys, welcome to this new video. So tomorrow I'm going on holidays, so today I need to get my balcony garden ready for my absence and to prepare all of those plants to make sure that they survive while I'm gone, because I don't have a self-watering system. I can't have self-watering system in this garden because I don't have outdoor tap. So all of these plants are completely on their own while I'm gone. So there's a couple of things that I do to make sure that these plants survive my absence. So I thought I will share that with you. Perhaps you will find it helpful, and perhaps that's something that you can apply to your own garden when it will be your turn to go on vacation. Just one thing I wanted to say is that as long as these tips, I find them helpful and I find that it works really well for me. But if you're planning to go on longer holidays, like if you're planning to be away for 2-3 weeks at a time, it might be a good idea to actually ask someone to come over to water your plants, because even the best tips and tricks of the world will not keep your plants alive for 3 weeks in the heat of summer without water. You really need someone to come over to water your plants at least once a week if possible. And what I find helpful is to not overwhelm people with the amount of information. Just tell them to water your plants. Any amount of water that they give to your plants during that time is honestly going to be helpful and can be actually game-changing. And what actually helps a lot as well is to already prepare them, those watering cans or buckets with water, so that when they arrive in your apartment or in your garden, that water is already ready. They can just grab it and go water your plants. Saves them time, saves them effort, and makes life easier for everyone. Okay, and just before we jump into that whole process of what I actually do before I leave on holidays, there's a couple of things that I would like to share with you that I think make a huge difference. Perhaps it's not something that you can do right away, but maybe something that you can apply starting from the next gardening season. So one of the first things is the choice of containers. I'm a huge fan of terracotta pots, but terracotta pots the soil in terracotta pots will dry out quicker than, for example, soil in plastic pots. So in my container garden, for all of those plants that are more water thirsty or that like consistent moisture, I picked plastic pots because these are gonna hold water for a longer time. And then the second thing that is really important, and now this is a game changer, is the potting soil. I highly encourage you to customize your potting mix a little bit, because if you're just gonna grab a random bag of potting mix from the garden center, these are usually poor quality. They only contain peat moss, and this is gonna dry out so rapidly that you will have to water those plants sometimes even twice a day in the heat of summer. So for my larger plants, for my trees and shrubs and larger climbers, I always mix a good quality multi-purpose potting mix with garden soil, because garden soil has incredible capacity of holding water and nutrients, and it's also heavier, so it provides more anchorage for those larger, taller plants. And then for my annual planters, these by default, they dry out rapidly in the heat of summer, all of those annual flowers. So for these planters, I created my own custom potting mix recipe as well. And I actually share that with you through my membership program. If you're interested, you can check that out. But I use a whole bunch of different ingredients that create a really light and fluffy potting mix. This is what those annual plants need. But at the same time, this is a potting mix that holds moisture for a couple of days. This is a recipe that I've been using in my own garden for the past several years. And with this potting mix recipe, I water my plants twice a week, sometimes 3 times a week if it's really hot. But that being said, I can skip 2, sometimes 3 days of watering instead of having to water them twice a day. So this potting mix is really great, and this is what I'm using in my own garden as well. Okay, and now the third thing that's gonna make a difference, and this is something that you can apply right away, is mulch. Mulch basically is a layer of either organic or inorganic matter that you put on top of your potting soil. And this not only gives more decorative finish, but it's also great at preventing the soil from drying out too quickly in summer. And you can use anything as mulch, whatever you have available on hand. Here I used some decorative pebbles, but I'm also a huge fan of pine cones, and in most of my containers I use pine cones as mulch. It doesn't really matter. The goal is just to cover the top layer of soil to prevent that soil from drying out too quickly. Alright, so this is like my base, and I think that's really important, because when you start with a good base with, let's say, plastic pots, but this is not necessary. As I said, I have some terracotta pots as well, but if you really want to improve water retention, then plastic pots are a great option. And then on top of that, if you have water retaining potting mix, and then if you mulch your pots, this is already an incredible base that not only will allow you to skip a couple of days of watering during summer, but you also know that when you leave on holidays, those plants are not going to dry out so rapidly. So when you come back, they may be a little bit wilted, but they will surely just bounce back the moment you water them. So I highly encourage you to think a little bit more about that base, because as I said, those tips and tricks, they are nice, but if you are not starting with a good base, those tips and tricks are not going to do much for you. Okay, so obviously the first thing that I do is I water my plants, but a couple of things here. First, I mix this additive with water. This is Power Roots, and I spoke a great deal about this product in my videos because I've been using it for years and it has so many incredible uses. So technically, it's meant to stimulate plants' roots and to help plants with the transplant shock, but because it contains potassium and vitamins, I find many other great uses for this product. For example, I use it in autumn as well to prepare my plants for winter, because potassium is a mineral that helps with plants' resistance and helps your plants overcome any kind of stressful situations. So it's great to use just before winter to prepare your plants for winter, to make them more resistant to frost. It's great to use when you struggle with some pests and diseases because it makes your plant physically more resistant. And that's also what I use when I prepare my plants before I go on holidays, because, you know, to help them kind of through that stressful period of time. Okay, and then when I actually water my plants, I don't water them as I normally would, because normally I would just, water the plants until I see water coming out of the drainage hole. Before I go on holidays, I want to oversaturate the soil. I want that soil to be wet and soggy, and this is not going to kill your plants, because overwatering is not caused by the amount of water that you give, but by the frequency of watering. So obviously, if I were to do it every single day, then I would kill my plants. But if I do it only one time, it's not gonna kill them. Quite the opposite. It's gonna completely saturate that soil, and that soil will hold water for a couple days more than it normally would. So how it looks, I water my plants. I give them quite a lot of water, right? But then I leave the soil for a moment, I let it absorb all that water, and then I usually come back again and water them once again. Another thing that I recommend you do if you don't have that system already in place in your container garden is to group plants together. This also has many great benefits. First of all, when plants are grouped together, when they are close by, they create sort of their own microclimate where they kind of protect one another, and then humidity is higher around these plants, so this also prevents the soil from drying out too quickly. If you have a very sunny balcony, I recommend bringing all of your more fragile plants, those plants that tend to dry out too quickly, bring them all in some shade spot in your garden, in some shady corner, group them all together in there. If you don't have any shady corner in your garden, then you can use stuff like tables or chairs and bench, and place all of those plants under the table or under the bench, under the chairs, just to give them that extra protection from the sun while you're away. Another thing that I do just before I leave, obviously I harvest everything I can in my veggie garden, for once to not waste all of these yummy fruits and veggies, but also this prevents the plant from spending unnecessary energy on keeping all of these ripe fruits and veggies on it. And the same goes for flowers. I try to pinch off any dead and spent flowers to help the plant kind of focus the energy on, let's say, survival rather than on keeping all of those flowers attached to the plant. Alright, so my garden is ready. I can go on holidays, and fingers crossed everything is fine when I come back. So as I said, the best tip I can share with you is start with a good base. When you have a good base, when you have water retaining potting mix, and then when you mulch your plants, this is already a game changer, and it will significantly improve the water holding capacity of your potting soil, and you will not need to water nearly as often. And then again, you can go on holidays and not worry that your plants are gonna die after 2 days of your absence. And then one other important information I would like to share is when you come back from holidays and you notice perhaps some plants are wilted, perhaps in some containers the soil is bone dry. I've seen some people completely submerge those plants, so they kind of like drop the plants in a bucket of water, and I don't recommend doing that, because this can actually shock your plant, because the plant goes from completely dry, bone dry, to completely saturated, so that can kind of shock your plant a little bit. So in my opinion, it's a better idea to just gently water your plant, let that soil absorb a little bit of water, let that plant bounce back a little bit, and then you can water again, and then you can follow with your usual watering and fertilizing routine. There's something called permanent wilting point. So if your plants don't bounce back within the first 48 hours, if they are still wilted after those 48 hours, that's usually a sign that the plant has reached permanent wilting point and it's not gonna bounce back. So unfortunately, in most case scenarios, it's the end for that plant and there's not really point keeping it. But if it's a perennial plant, or it's a plant that you really care about, I highly encourage you to give it one last chance, because sometimes the plant can actually grow back from the base. Like even if all the foliage dies, sometimes the plant can actually sprout back from the base, and it can be a positive surprise. Okay, you guys, I hope that you found some helpful information in today's video, and as per usual, we will see each other in the next one. Perhaps this time I can share maybe some vlog from the holidays. Obviously garden themed, I will see what I can do, but thanks so much for watching and see you again in the next video.